Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another movie review, and today I'm reviewing a film that I saw with Jeff and LJ the same night we saw Carrie. I know, kind of a weird double feature, see Carrie and then see this film. It's a film that we've known would be coming out for a while. I know a lot of us are kind of worried that, how the film was going to be because it was so long with no trailer. But I, went into it with low expectations, as I usually do with a film. Partially because I only watched the first trailer, which is something I always try to do. I only like watching the first trailer, just to see what the tone and something the film was probably going to be. And, of course, the film I'm talking about is Escape Plan, formerly known as Exit Plan or The Tomb. I personally think they should have kept the title The Tomb, because that seems to fit the film a little bit more. Escape Plan, not that bad of a title, but Exit Plan sounds more like an action thriller type title. Which, that's basically what the film is. It's an action thriller. But it leans... For most of the film, it leans more towards the thriller side of things. At least the first two acts, and then the third act is where it actually starts to get action-y, which... I would be lying if I said I didn't kind of expect that, mostly because it's a prison movie. And I expected, maybe a little bit of action in the second act, and then the third act to be more action-y. And I wasn't disappointed with that. If anything, it had a little bit more thriller aspect than I kind of expected in the first two acts, but... On the whole, I was entertained by the film. Of course, as you can tell, it's that. Now, the film was made for $50 million. I've also heard it was made for $70 million, but I think it's around there. I'd say after watching the film, probably more 50, or could be 70, you never know. And I can mostly see that budget up on the screen, but I have a feeling some of the actors took some of the money too. I mean, besides Arnold and Sly in the movie, we got Jim Caviezel, Jesus himself. We have Curtis 50 Cent Jackson. We got Vinnie Jones. We got Vincent. I always have trouble with this guy's name. We got Vincent D'Onofrio, Gomer Pyle. We got Sam Neill. And of course, the guy who's directing, he is kind of a seasoned director, although I don't think he's directed action. Mikael Håfström. I've only seen one of his previous films, but I've heard of two of them. I saw his last film, The Right, and that's kind of that's a horror thriller. I thought it was pretty good. You like cats? No? Welcome to Rome. It's full of them. Before that, he directed a film called Shanghai. Before that, he directed 1408, which I still haven't seen. Then Derailed, Drowning Ghost, Evil, Days Like This, and Vendetta. I've never heard of any of those films, so I don't know. So, as far as I know, this is his first attempt at action, and I thought he did a decent job. I didn't really notice any noticeable shaking cam, not like... Not like that. No, I gotta fix that. There were times where it looked like the camera operator might accidentally be moving a little weird, but it looked more like he was attempting a pan or anything. It wasn't as bad as some of the shaky cam was in A Good Day to Die Hard. Where it's even noticeable in a talking scene. And then again, I also didn't notice any shaky cam in Bullet to the Head, and I'm probably the only one in our group that likes that film. But this film I thought was better than those two films, which later in the review I'll probably rank them according to the other action films from this year. Now, of course, the plot is kind of straightforward, as we saw in the trailer. Sly plays a character named Ray Breslin, who is a former prosecuting attorney, who now runs a company that breaks out of maximum security prisons to test how effective they are. Now, why he left his prosecuting job, I'm not going to spoil, but it's interesting and it's believable. And it also kind of makes you feel a little sad for the character and explains why he is the way he is, partially. Because if something like this happened, you're probably going to change your perspective on certain things, especially the prison system. Made me feel for his character. Now, as we see in the trailer, he does that one job at the beginning, but it's longer in the film, but we already see the ending of it. So that scene, I think the trailer kind of spoils the suspense of the scene, but I think it does it to kind of set up the premise of the film. But it's interesting to see how in the movie it plays out longer, but it's more just interesting to see from a editing and a filmmaking perspective. The film picks up a little more steam once he actually accepts the job and is taken into the tomb, which is done kind of like how we see in the movie. He's contracted by the CIA, he accepts the job, and he's taken captive, though unlike what the trailer says, it has nothing to do with the person that hires him, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Now, he wakes up in the tomb, and, he thinks at first he thinks things are going to plan, but then after a while he sees it's not. His code word doesn't work, and he sees that the warden is not who he thought it was. The warden is instead Jim Caviezel. And of course, he's not under his real name here. He's under the name Porthos, or Portos, how Arnold says, excuse me, which I believe that name is taken from one of Alexander Dumas's books, but I could be wrong. Sounds similar. Now, you could tell at first, Sly's a new guy in that particular prison, so all the other prisoners are going to look at him like fresh fish. Maybe not like that because of how big he is, but more like fresh meat. And he gets into a little scuffle, and of course, then when you get that scene, back away, and Arnold and Sly basically become buddies in the film. It's not the same type of it's a different type of buddy relationship than we saw in the previous two films they've been in together, where it was Arnold with a cameo. Whereas the Expendable films, their characters, it's written in a way that is kind of a little wink to the audience, because we know how Sly and Arnold have been in real life, and their characters kind of have that vibe. Whereas here they're meeting for the first time, and they become friends over the course of the film. It seems a little natural, but could have had a little bit more dialogue between them to really strengthen it. But for how they do it, I find it believable. I mean, friendships can start weird. I mean, mine and Jeff's friendship started over the book Dracula. I mean, reading it in class, like, yeah, Dracula. It goes from there. Friendships can start weird. And, of course, as his profession, Ray is going to keep trying to break out of prison. And you're going to guess eventually Arnold's character named Rottmayer is eventually going to want a piece of it. And it goes from there, and they eventually escape at the end. I'm not going to spoil how, but it's interesting. And as I said before, the third act has a lot of the action of the film. But there's a couple moments in the second act where they almost escape, and there's a reveal of where the prison is, which I'm not going to spoil it. I'm like, as the film was going, I should have been able to guess this is where the prison was based on the set design, which for those of you who haven't seen the film, that should probably give you a little minor hint. But I was still a little surprised, and of course you could see the surprise on Sly's face when he gets up there. It's basically like, oh, fuck, look. But it was an interesting place. I mean, a prison like this is probably the best place to put it. Makes escape virtually impossible, even if you were to get out of your cell and out of the prison. Now, writing-wise, the film was written by Miles Chapman and Jason Keller, which only one of them has a page, Jason Keller. Let's see what he's written. Let's see, he wrote Machine Gun Preacher, which I haven't seen yet. He wrote Mirror, Mirror. He wrote Escape Plan. Yeah, he was also the executive producer for A Good Day to Die Hard. And that's about all it says here. And the only other thing it notes is his father is Ron Keller, a former professional baseball player. So I guess he has some experience. If anything, I want to know if he wrote the original screenplay or if he did rewrites. I'm going to guess, since it has two writers, either they collaborated or one rewrote the other one's script. Because if anything, like I said before, the first two acts is where the writing needed to be tweaked a little bit, mostly some of the dialogue, but for what it got, I didn't mind it. If there's anything in the last half of the movie that could have been written a little bit better, it's probably a couple of the one-liners. They're not, like as good as classic ones from either character, like, "You're the disease, I'm the cure. Go ahead, I don't work here," or "I don't shop here," or even "I'll be back," or other stuff like that. It's not as classic as that, but it's serviceable for the scene, but still, I guess for their first team-up, I guess serviceable one-liners is not what we would expect, but it is what it is. And it doesn't take away from the entertainment I get from the film. It's just one little minor thing that keeps their team-up from reaching nirvana. Now, the music was done by Alex Hefes, if I'm saying that right, and I thought his score was decent. Like I said, not as classic as previous scores, but apparently he's a semi-experienced one. I only recognize two of the films on his list, besides, of course, this one. His previous film was The Right, that he did the score for, and he also did the score for The Last King of Scotland. And the next film, apparently, he did the score for is Mandela: Long Walk to Freedom, which, ironically, there was a trailer for before this film, which is like, why would you put a trailer for that? Now, acting-wise, Sly and Arnold are probably some of the better actors in the film, because it's a big cast, because, prisoners, but I'm not going to go through every single one. Just the main characters. They did a good job. They had some good back and forth with each other, which is to be expected. I mean, they know each other in real life, so they're going to be able to play off that. But make it seem like they actually meet each other for the first time. Sly, he's the one that seems to have more moments, mostly because his character is the lead of the two, especially since we see him in the first part of the first act, and then he's the one that's trying most of the escape attempts in the second act. And also in the third act, he gets the better fight scene, but it's good to see him and Arnold together. They do have some good moments. Like, there's a moment where Arnold is actually speaking in his native German with the subtitles. It's interesting to see Arnold speak in German in a movie. I could be wrong, but has he ever spoken German in a movie before? You know, where he's not being dubbed or something. I don't know. And like I said, they're back and forth. Is kind of what makes the first two halves of the movie. Jim Caviezel as our villain, Willard Hobbs. I'll say the character, how it was written, could have been a little bit better, because how he's written, he's not as memorable as, say, action villains like Cohagen or even Snipes' character from Demolition Man, or even how Arnold was at the original Terminator, but that's a different type of villain altogether. But Caviezel made up for that with how he pulled off the character. I mean, characters, he's not really three-dimensional because we don't know why he's all doing this other than, money and the fact that he likes being a warden. But Caviezel brought a little bit of a snobbish charm to the role. I mean, there's some moments where he's, just like looking at the watch like, when's this going to get over? It kind of adds that, and it makes you really hate the guy. And of course, I have to say, he does get an interesting comeuppance. It's done in CGI, kind of like how they did Stone Cold's death in Expendables 1, but for how they did it, I kind of can excuse it. I mean, it's a dangerous thing to do. Could have been done with stuntmen, but I don't mind the fact that they did CGI. Amy Ryan plays Abigail Ross, who is, I'm guessing, the woman that works with Sly in his company. She did a decent job. Just like 50 Cent wasn't really that annoying in his character. He's only in a handful of scenes. And of course, he does get a good moment where he does something to one of the characters, which I'm not going to spoil, but it was interesting. Vinnie Jones is Drake. He is our secondary villain, and he actually does a good job. He's basically like, based on his voice, I'd say he's kind of like Jason Statham. He's the angry British guy, though. I have to say it would have been more interesting to see Jason Statham in this role, probably. Because, he mostly does heroes. It would have been nice to see him be a villain in a movie with Sly, and then him and Sly have a fight scene. Would have been interesting, would have been a change from, "You're crazy, you could have killed me, you're welcome." Would have been a change from that. But Vinnie Jones, he does a pretty good job. You really hate him the moment you hear his voice. You're like, oh, this guy. And he has a pretty extensive filmography, but the only other film he's been in that I've actually seen, of course, is X-Men The Last Stand, which I think you all know who he played in that film. I'm the Juggernaut, bitch! That's alright. He has a little bit more to do here than he did as Juggernaut, but hard to say which role is better. Then, of course, Vincent D'Onofrio as Lester Clark. He's a guy that works with Sly. Now, I don't know if it's how the character was written or how Vincent decided to pull the character off, but you could see a mile away what the twist involving this character is going to be. Which I think is probably Vincent, how he did the character. Or like how he did some of the scenes, or maybe with just different takes. I don't know, but you can tell right away. And in that it's a little disappointing, but I guess for me personally, with why he did it, it's kind of not. But then it makes you wonder, why would he do this? But he gets a pretty good comeuppance in the end for it, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Then, of course, Sam Neill plays the doctor of the tomb, Dr. Emil Kyrie. Which I have to say, if there's any surprise with who was in the cast, this is it, because he wasn't in any of the trailers I saw. So the moment I see him, I'm like, oh my god, it's Sam Neill. And he actually did a very decent job for the small role he has. And he has a good interaction with Sly in the movie, and of course, he actually kind of has a hand in what happens in the third act, but I'm not going to spoil it specifically. And then, of course, after that, he just disappears from the movie, which I want to know, is there a deleted scene where something happens to him, or is he just not in the movie because of the fact that none of the scenes involving him take place none of the scenes involving the third act take place where he is on the ship. That's just my guess of it anyway. Would have been interesting to at least see him at the end, but I guess with how the movie ends, I guess not to be. Now, are there any big twists in the film? There is a minor one at the end, which you kind of could see it coming, but not. I kind of, as the movie was about halfway through, I'm like, okay, that's a possibility of what could happen. It's not what I expected, mostly because of how Arnold did the acting. I kind of expected his character to be just a very loyal guy. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but those of you who've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. I thought it was a little interesting. I guess it just show. I don't really know how to describe this, but other than it was an interesting idea, and I felt it worked. And it makes me wonder if Jim Caviezel's character would have seen this coming, and if he did, what would he have done if he had suspected it? Now, of course, I have to say this about Arnold's acting. Even though he had an 8-year hiatus, after this, I have to say he's probably going to do a good job again in these. Because the first 2 roles after his governorship were just cameos in the Expendables films. Then, of course, he had The Last Stand, which, it's more of him acting in the first half and then him doing his action self in the second half, which works for that film, even though that film was written more for someone like Liam Neeson or someone like Mel Gibson, being kind of like that. Whereas in this film, it was more written for someone like Arnold, and he pulls it off. And I have to say, even though in the beginning he still has some of his acting rust, by the end, at least with me, it's kind of off a little. Especially once he gets the gun and has a scene that, with the score, kind of gave me a Terminator-like vibe. And I have to say, after watching this movie, I look forward to seeing these two team up in movies again. This is probably not the ideal film we wanted for their first team up, because there's not that much action in it, but it's serviceable for the first one. But it also makes me wish they had teamed up at least once back in their heyday, as like in a buddy film or a buddy war movie, which they can still do that. I don't know, maybe even though probably not an adaptation of the game, something maybe like Army of Two, like a movie in that kind of vibe, Mercenaries. I know people are gonna say, it's derivative of the Expendables. Hey, you could do a 2-man team one like that. Or you could even do a spin-off of the Expendables taking place before the first film where they were still in the same team. That'd be interesting. Or probably be better if they didn't do anything connected to the Expendables with the characters, but it'd be interesting to see these two together again. A comedy, maybe if it's written correctly. It seems with comedies, Arnold seems to have the better luck, because the only comedies Sly was in, the only 2 comedies that Sly was in that come to mind are Rhinestone and Stopping My Mom Will Shoot. Mom! Whereas Arnold's comedies, we got Twins, we got Kindergarten Cop, There Is No Bathroom, and Jingle All the Way. I'm not a pervert, I just want a Turbo Man doll. And then, of course, Junior. I want my baby! Not bad, 3 out of 4. Doing the math right? Yeah, 3 out of 4. Then, of course, the Twins sequel, but that's another day, another video. But I have to say, probably action films would probably be best for them, at least if they team up. And it'd be interesting to see them get some other directors in, I always forget the guy's name. The guy that directed the first Predator movie. Once he's done with his legal things, it'd be nice to see him direct a movie with Arnold and Sly. Hey, get Rennie Harlan to direct a movie with Arnold and Sly. That'd be badass. In conclusion, it is an entertaining film. It has a few minor flaws, like a little bit in the writing, and then Arnold having a little bit of the rust at the beginning, and also the one-liners. And also might disappoint some people in the fact that it's not too actiony until the third act, but it's entertaining. It's not a film probably everyone will love. And it has a 7.5 on IMDb, which a little bit too high. It could be a little bit lower. I'd say at most a 7, but probably a 6.5 or a 6 would be better, more appropriate. It has a 68 on Rotten Tomatoes with the audience, which this is a film I expect a higher score with the audience, and it has a 47 with the critics, which I kind of expected, and this is their consensus. As much fun as it is to see Sly and Arnold team up on screen, Escape Plan fails to offer much more than a pale imitation of 1980s popcorn thrills. I wouldn't really say an imitation. It seems it's going for a throwback vibe, not an imitation. Imitation would be a more mainstream film trying to act badass. If anything, I'd say Expendables 2 is more like that than this one, even though I like Expendables 2. That one seems more like it, and that's mostly because of its being more humorous. This and Expendables 1, those are more throwbacks, although it's hard to say if I like this or Expendables 1 better. I gotta watch them back to back to be sure. But I can see why this got lower critic reviews than one would expect. Now, how does it match up to the other action films that have come out this year? I'd say so far my favorite one is probably still Olympus Has Fallen. I'd say it's better than Bullet to the Head and A Good Day to Die Hard. I'd say it's probably about even, at least in my opinion, with The Last Stand. Maybe Last Stand's a little bit higher, maybe it's a little lower. I gotta watch Last Stand again to get my full feelings on it. But it's close. Although I'll say Arnold has more to do in Last Stand, but that's because he's the main lead in that film. Whereas in this one, he's one of the leads, but his character is the secondary lead. And it's like it's more time with guns, but Arnold does kind of make up for it once he gets to the helicopter later in the movie. That's all I'm saying. And of course, I'll say one thing: Last Stand has better lines. I'm the sheriff. Welcome to Somerton. You fucked with my day off. You give immigrants a bad name. You know, better, more natural one-liners. Anyway, my rating for Escape Plan, 4 out of 5 stars. If you're a fan of either actor, I'd say it's worth at least one watch, whether you like it or hate it.